For this presscast, I will be discussing the ideas analysed in the following two papers: Information Literacy and Neuropolitics by Andrew Whitworth, and Three Theoretical Perspectives on Information Literacy by Lindberg, Sundin and Talja. The ideas contained in these papers will be discussed against the backdrop of Andrew Whitworth's triadic model of information relationships. So let's start with some definitions. In Andrew Whitworth's paper, there is the suggestion that information is embedded into all that is made by humans. The control of such informational resources leads on to what is termed neuropolitics. Lindberg's paper similarly gives a very broad definition of information, stating that it is not meaningful to restrict information to text only, and that it can be anything that carries informative potential, like this barn behind me or the fence in front of me. In mind, information literacy extends from the ability to read and write, and, according to Lindberg's paper, refers to the ability to think critically and challenge dominant ideologies. The rapid development of information and communication technologies and new media during the last few decades has certainly increased the need for expanding definitions of literacy. This is important because it shows that now more than at any other point in history, information literacy does not only transform individuals, but is also the condition for individuals' power to transform society. We look at these ideas surrounding information and information literacy for each leg of the triadic model. We start here by looking at the functional, objective and generic leg of the triadic model of informational relationships. We will be taking a socio-cultural perspective. Now, the socio-cultural perspective put forward in Lindberg's paper on learning emphasises the relationship between individuals and various forms of collective practices. It fits into our macro-level leg of the triadic model because it serves as an objective way of valuing information. In order to participate in a practice and its activities, individuals need to learn a specific language where certain concepts, theories and beliefs are central. This is because such a platform means that a piece of work, for example, can be seen as valuable if it is properly published and verified by way of peer review. What the socio-cultural perspective also indicates, according to Lindberg, is about being able to use technologies for communication in a way that corresponds with the purpose of the practice. This includes technologies which enable us to find, work and use information, for instance scientific journals, databases and websites. A socio-cultural perspective, therefore, mainly contributes to our understanding of how information literacy may be seen in relation to the tools that we use and act upon when carrying out information activities. It is the technologies which Lindberg refers to that has reshaped literacy in the last few decades, leading to a situation of information abundance, a positive metaphor that is used in Whitworth's paper. Whitworth's paper does, however, remind us of the potential pitfalls of an abundance of information at the macro level, specifically drawing our attention to Thompson's notion of counter-knowledge, a result of a decline in traditional sources of knowledge. Information literacy for this domain, then, is about effective information seeking and being able to effectively judge the validity of information on the part of society. In the absence of objective valuations, for example with astrology or conspiracy theories, we are simply left with counter-knowledge. Now, according to Lindberg's paper, for information literacy education, this implies it is important to reveal and make explicit the perspectives, values and beliefs connected to the specific tools for information seeking and how the application and understanding of these tools differ in different practices. The function of search engines and social networking tools influence our possibilities for action through offering us both resources and restrictions. As information seekers, for example, we are at the mercy of Google's individualized ranking of search hits. Likewise, we are dependent on the functionalities offered by Facebook or Twitter. Tools then, according to Lindbergh's paper, are not neutral to our activities. They are impregnated with perspectives which effectively mediates our understanding of the world. Arguably, having an awareness of this is at least one way in which we can begin to counter knowledge at this macro level. The argument made by Lindbergh, therefore, is that from the point of view of teaching information literacy, less emphasis should be placed on seeking and finding information in favour of paying more attention to the evaluation, to judging the information's validity with a view to constructing meaning from information. Individuals need to conform to the practice of generic rules and skills of finding and interpreting information. However, these rules should be open to appraisal, such that we can continue to make well-informed, objective decisions. Wordsworth's paper reinforces this argument from the standpoint of neuropolitics, stating that the cognitive schema, that is to say ways of thinking, within the information processing systems should be open to continuous review and scrutiny. This view forms the basis of Whitworth's argument for a politically aware information literacy education in order to reverse the effects of what he has termed information obesity, which is politically disempowering. Next up, and we have the personal, subjective and situated domain of the triadic model of informational relationships. The whole basis of this micro-level leg is that it is personal and subjective, which facilitates, therefore, creativity. Lindbergh would call this level the phenomenographic perspective, which takes a constructivist view of learning, so its focus is on how the individual constructs meaning from a piece of information. A constructivist view of learning would suggest that it is up to the individual student, therefore, to take ownership of the information they are confronted with in order to make their own decisions and judgments about what it is that is relevant and important. Lindbergh follows on from this idea to suggest that the differences between students' ways of using information interact closely with the quality of their learning outcomes. She talks about the need, for example, for individuals to not only understand and evaluate information, but also to be able to take a standpoint when faced with flows of contradictory information. We can use this to posit that an individual can improve his or her information literacy simply by engaging with information at a deeper level. Wordsworth's paper certainly echoes this idea, emphasising that information literacy requires not just the ability to retrieve information, but also the ability to critique it and scrutinise it. The act of questioning and critically reviewing issues of importance, therefore, is part and parcel of what it means for an individual to be informationally literate. Without subjective value, Whitworth asserts that individuals would be subject to groupthink, in which information is pushed at them by their organisations or communities. When hegemonic powers are particularly strong, it can be seen that the groupthink is the dominant form of thought, which, when you consider situations of stereotyping or certain types of discrimination, for example, groupthink can be an undesirable outcome. Subjective value, then, is the ability of people to think for themselves and is in part needed as the basis of counter-hegemonic activity. This paper does, however, state but it is not enough to rely on subjective value alone. The other legs of a triad should come into play so that the information is also evaluated against the objective leg of the triad discussed earlier and the intersubjective leg, which we will go on to analyse. The reason for this is because relying on subjective value alone can lead to cognitive biases, whereby information that challenges our existing beliefs may go ignored or misinterpreted. The growth of the internet can certainly be seen to have increased the incidence of cognitive biases, as we tend to only visit websites, for example, that are in line with our opinions, political or otherwise. The way search engines are built also ultimately skews our search results to display only results based on our previous searches. The implication here is that learning can be prevented in certain situations. When teaching information literacy, therefore, we should account for this personal and subjective basis of information literacy by ensuring that our teaching is context-specific. We must ensure that individuals are fully aware of issues of groupthink and cognitive biases, and then facilitate an environment in which learners can find out for themselves. Learners should then be encouraged to question, critique, and scrutinise the information that they find. Finally, we come to the critical, intersubjective and transformational leg of the triadic model of informational relationships. The discourse analytic perspective presented in Lindbergh's paper fits in with this meso level of our triadic model because it looks at how we assign value to information collectively. It is intersubjective insofar as this domain serves as a filter and a way of valuing information on the part of the community. The metaphors that have been used in Whitworth's paper to describe information, such as information overload, information abundance, and information obesity, each form part of the overall discourse of information literacy. They lead us to certain ways of thinking about what information is and how it is valued. This paper points out that we are therefore users of already existing discourses, and we have no recourse but to use the language available to us. When using existing expressions, we accept implicit claims about, for instance, the nature of information, claims that we would not necessarily readily accept as valid if we were to place them under closer scrutiny. Whitworth's paper draws our attention to a hegemonic discourse, whereby the very structures and content of language can be used to exclude. The ability to enter particular discourses may be limited to those who have mastered certain jargon or language. The legal profession is given as an example of such gatekeeping, but he suggests that it can happen informally too, for example being part of the socialization practices which happen in almost all organizations and their subcultures. The idea of discursive shifts presented in Lindbergh's paper take place when an established way of framing and approaching a topic begins to appear as too one-sided and limited. Discursive change thus entails new definitions for established concepts. It can be inferred from Whitworth's paper that in order for a shift in discourse to take place, this needs to be precipitated by the so-called counter-hegemonic and decolonizing activity. Whitworth states that this activity occurs from the bottom up when communities come together to bring about change. In doing so, this facilitates a new intersubjective way of valuing and filtering information, which makes a shift in discourse possible. We can see shifts in discourse in society generally, for example with the end of racial segregation in America as a result of the civil rights movement. Here communities came together and a new set of values and collective judgments became embedded into the overall public opinion. Now in the digital context in which we live, The technical ability to store, analyse, filter, process and apply information is, according to Whitworth, a foundation of hegemonic power. Handing over such control of information can be useful by way of overcoming relativism, the idea that there are no absolute truths. However, those gatekeepers need to be held accountable, and this can only be possible when the discourse is open to public scrutiny. Therefore necessary for people to be prepared to work together to challenge and change collective judgments. As a community, being aware of and having a critical eye on the discourses in place facilitates intersubjectivity, such that communities can come together to make changes in collective judgments and therefore shift the discourse. In politics, this can be seen most commonly when new governments are voted into power. According to Whitworth, this is where the politically aware information literacy educator can make a difference, by remaining vigilant over the effects of cognitive schema and learning to see what these structures are often designed to conceal. This is where the intersubjective domain becomes transformational, as it can facilitate changes in collective judgments which change the structures that govern our relationship with information. We can see then that the socio-cultural perspective, phenomenographic perspective, and the discourse analytic perspective can all be mapped to the objective, subjective, and intersubjective value, together forming a complex structure of existing knowledge. In order to improve our information literacy, we need to strike a balance between each domain in this triadic model. By doing so, we can engage with information at a deeper level. This means thinking critically and scrutinizing information within each domain on the part of the individual, organizations, and the wider community. Learners should be encouraged to think through informational issues independently, question the information they are consuming, and should be aware of potential pitfalls to their information processing, such as counter-knowledge, groupthink, and relativism. When individuals come together, they need to be prepared to work collectively to appraise the informational discourse and, if necessary, challenge the dominant ideologies in order to make changes in the structures that govern our relationship with information.